My name is Natalie, 34 years old, and I just watched my parents try to destroy my life over a cryptocurrency scam. They called me a freeloader, shoved an eviction notice in my face, and demanded I surrender my home to fund my brother-in-law's delusional business. My father even screamed that I could not afford a car to drive myself out of his sight. He had no idea the sleek black BMW pulling into his driveway was not a rideshare. It was my private chauffeur bringing the legal documents that would leave them all bankrupt. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our upscale Chicago suburb, my parents Richard and Susan made it clear who the golden child was. Our sprawling house was a shrine to my younger sister Brittany. She got whatever she wanted while I was the invisible workhorse expected to stay out of the way. They assumed my quiet nature meant I was weak. They assumed my remote work meant I was barely scraping by. They were dead wrong. Last Thursday, I was summoned to my parents' house for an urgent family meeting. I arrived expecting a discussion about holiday plans. Instead, I walked right into a calculated ambush. The moment I sat down at the formal dining table, the atmosphere shifted. Brittany was obsessively checking her phone, sporting a new diamond bracelet. Sitting next to her was her husband, Jamal. Jamal is an African-American man who loves to play the part of a high-rolling Wall Street wolf. He wore a tailored suit that screamed new money and a flashy gold watch. He called himself a crypto entrepreneur, which was just a fancy way of saying he gambled with other people's money. My mother Susan sat at the head of the table sipping red wine, watching the scene unfold with quiet approval. Without a greeting, my father Richard stood up. His face was flushed with anger. He threw a thick manila folder onto the center of the table. It landed with a loud smack next to the fine china. "Sign the paper, Natalie," my father barked, leaning his heavy frame over the table. "I am not going to ask you again." I slowly opened the folder. Inside was a formal eviction notice and a quitclaim deed. They were demanding that I legally surrender the keys and all tenant rights to the rent-controlled apartment my grandmother had left in my care before she passed away. It was the only asset in this family that had not been drained to fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle. "I am not signing anything, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "Grandma wanted me in that apartment. It is my home. Do not you dare bring my wife into this," Jamal interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. He leaned forward, trying to intimidate me. "Brittany deserves the best. Right now, my investment firm is on the verge of a massive decentralized finance acquisition. We need extreme capital liquidity. Selling that dusty old apartment is the absolute fastest way to free up cash. You are just sitting in it, typing on your laptop all day, doing whatever freelance computer work you do. You do not need a two-bedroom place in the city." "It is true," Brittany chimed in, glaring at me. "Jamal is about to secure a multi-million-dollar valuation. You are being incredibly selfish. You are wearing a sweater you have had for 5 years. What do you even need space for? You do not have a real career. Just be a team player and help our family." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. This was the toxic dynamic I had endured my whole life. "I am not signing over Grandma's apartment so Jamal can throw money into a volatile crypto market," I said firmly. "That apartment is my safety net, and I know he has not closed a legitimate deal in 2 years. My father stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat. Jamal is a visionary. He drives a luxury sports car. He takes care of your sister. You cannot even afford a car. You took the bus here, so shut your mouth, pick up that pen, and sign the paper before I throw you out of this house permanently." Before I could respond, the deep purr of a high-performance engine vibrated through the windows. The crunch of gravel signaled a vehicle pulling into our private driveway. A brand-new jet-black BMW stopped right outside. I calmly picked up my purse and smiled. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I said. "I did not drive here. My ride is here." The room went completely silent as the heavy doors of the BMW opened. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out. He adjusted his tie and walked toward our front porch with a thick leather briefcase in his hand. Jamal let out a loud, forced laugh. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "You actually rented an Uber Black just to impress us. That is pathetic, Natalie. Do you know how much a private car service costs? You are going to put yourself in debt just to put on a temporary show for your own family." My mother, Susan, shook her head in sheer disappointment. She reached over and placed her hand over Brittany's hand, comforting her as if my transportation choice was a violent personal attack. "This is exactly what we mean, Natalie." My mother sighed, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You are entirely irresponsible with your finances. You spend your money on silly stunts like hiring a luxury car, but you refuse to help your own flesh and blood when it truly matters. After everything we have sacrificed for you, I cannot believe how selfish and cold you have become." I turned away from the window and faced her directly. "Everything you have sacrificed for me. Please, Mom, enlighten me. What exactly have you sacrificed for me lately besides demanding my grandmother's apartment?" Susan pressed a hand to her chest, playing the ultimate victim perfectly. "We let you live in this house for 6 months after you finished college. We fed you. We put a roof over your head while you were trying to figure out your little computer hobby. We paid for your braces when you were 12. We supported you when no one else would. And now when your sister needs a simple favor to secure her future, you stab us in the back." A simple favor. I repeated the words, feeling a cold anger bubble in my chest. "You are asking me to sign away a piece of real estate worth hundreds of thousands of dollars so Jamal can gamble it away on internet coins and unstable digital assets. That is not a favor. That is financial suicide." Brittany scoffed loudly. She picked up her quilted Chanel handbag from the empty chair next to her and placed it deliberately on the dining table, making sure the gold logo caught the chandelier light. "You are just bitter because you do not understand real wealth," she sneered. "Jamal works with high net worth individuals. He is building an empire. Look at this bag, Natalie. Jamal bought this for me last week just because it was Tuesday. It costs more than you make in 6 months fixing routers from your sad little couch." I stared at the handbag, knowing full well Jamal was likely swimming in high-interest credit card debt to afford it. Brittany flipped her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder and continued her verbal assault. "You sit at home all day in your sweatpants, doing freelance tech support for whoever will hire you. You have no ambition. You have no real career trajectory. I am the face of Jamal's company at elite charity galas across the city. We have an image to uphold. We need that capital to close a massive deal that will set us up for life. You are holding us back because you are perfectly content being a nobody." The level of delusion in that room was absolutely suffocating. My parents nodded along with every single word Brittany said. In their eyes, she was the successful socialite, and Jamal was the financial genius who was going to elevate our family name into high society. I was just the stubborn, jealous obstacle in their way. "You know, Natalie, my father," Richard chimed in, his voice taking on a deeply patronizing tone. "Your sister is absolutely right. We are trying to build generational wealth here. Jamal is giving us an exclusive opportunity to get in on the ground floor of a major tech acquisition. You should be thanking him on your knees. Instead, you are sitting here acting like you know better than a man who manages millions of dollars for a living. You need to grow up, accept reality, and sign that quitclaim deed right now. If you do not, you will no longer be a part of this family. We will cut you off completely, and you will be left with nothing." I looked at each of them. My father with his red, angry face, my mother with her performative tears, Brittany with her smug, entitled smirk, and Jamal, the flashy con artist who had somehow convinced my parents to hand over their entire financial future to him. For years I had kept my head down. I had endured their insults, their blatant favoritism, and their constant belittling of my career. I let them believe I was a struggling freelancer because it was easier than dealing with their relentless greed. But tonight, that dynamic ended forever. I am not signing the deed, I said, my voice steady and resolute. And you do not need to cut me off, Dad. I am leaving on my own terms. Jamal slammed his fist on the table again, his facade cracking. You are not going anywhere until you sign those papers. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. The sharp chime echoed through the tense house, cutting off Jamal's temper tantrum. Before Jamal or my father could intercept, the front door swung open. The man in the charcoal suit stepped into the foyer, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He ignored the furious glares of my family and walked straight toward me, carrying the heavy leather briefcase like a weapon. My mother immediately stood up, adjusting her silk blouse. "Excuse me," she said, using her shrillest country club voice. "Who are you and who let you into my house?" The man did not even look at her. He stopped right beside my chair and offered me a slight, respectful nod. "Good evening, Natalie. I apologize for interrupting, but you asked me to deliver these documents immediately. I have the updated portfolio analysis and the finalized legal injunctions you requested." "Thank you, David," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Jamal. "Your timing is impeccable. Who the hell is this guy?" My father demanded, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. "And why is he calling you like he works for you?" "Natalie, I swear to God, if this is another one of your stupid games to get out of signing this quitclaim deed, I will call the police and have him removed for trespassing." "This is not a game, Dad," I said calmly, "and he is not trespassing. David is my attorney, and he also serves as the executive director of wealth management for my company. He is here because I asked him to be." Brittany burst into laughter, nearly spilling her glass of wine. "Your company!" she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You fix broken laptops in your pajamas. You do not have a wealth manager. You do not even have a dental plan. Stop embarrassing yourself. Just sign the stupid paper so Jamal can get back to doing real business with real money." I turned to Brittany, the coldness in my voice surprising even me. "Real money," I repeated. "Are you talking about the $40,000 you stole from Mom and Dad to pay off your secret credit cards 2 years ago? The debt they quietly covered up by taking out a second mortgage on this very house, just so you would not face the consequences of your own reckless shopping addiction." The dining room went completely still. Brittany's face drained of color. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while my father looked like he had just been struck by lightning. That was supposed to be a private family matter. My father sputtered, his voice suddenly lacking its previous booming authority. "How dare you throw that in your sister's face? I am throwing it in her face because you are all sitting here lecturing me about financial responsibility," I shot back, my voice rising. "You demand that I hand over Grandma's apartment, the only thing of value that has not been infected by your toxic need to spoil her. You want me to give up my security so she can keep pretending she lives like royalty while her husband gambles your retirement away." "That is a lie," Jamal yelled, slamming both hands on the table. He leaned aggressively toward me, his expensive cologne suddenly suffocating. "My investments are solid. Apollo Vanguard is generating unprecedented returns. You are just trying to deflect because you know you are a failure. You have no assets. You have no future. You are a lonely, bitter spinster trying to drag us down." I slowly stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I met Jamal's furious gaze without blinking. I reached out and took the thick manila folder my father had thrown at me earlier. With deliberate precision, I ripped the quitclaim deed in half, then into quarters, and let the pieces flutter down onto the expensive china plates. "I am not signing it," I stated, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You will not get a single dime from my grandmother's estate to fund this charade." My father lunged forward, grabbing my arm with a grip tight enough to bruise. "You ungrateful little bitch!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are completely cut off. You will never set foot in this house again. Let go of her immediately." David's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. He stepped forward, his hand hovering over his phone. If you do not remove your hand from my client this second, Richard, I will have the police here in 3 minutes, and I will personally press charges for assault." My father froze. He looked at David's cold, professional demeanor, then down at his hand gripping my arm. Slowly, reluctantly, he let go, but the sheer hatred in his eyes burned hotter than ever. Richard stepped back, adjusting his collar. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed through the tense dining room. "You think you can waltz in and threaten me?" he sneered, pointing at David. "I do not know what discount firm you work for, but you are out of your league. My daughter is a broke freelancer who buys her clothes at discount stores. She cannot afford a real attorney. You are probably some struggling actor she hired off the internet to put on a pathetic little show for us." Jamal adjusted his tie, stepping forward to intimidate David. "It is an absolutely pathetic stunt," Jamal said, shaking his head with an arrogant smirk. "She probably blew her entire month of rent just to have you drive her here in that rented BMW. Look at her, Richard. She does not have a single dime to her name. She has no real assets, no car of her own, and absolutely no future. You should leave before I have my personal security team come down here and escort you both off this property." David did not even blink. He maintained perfect posture, his expression completely devoid of emotion. Used to high-stakes corporate litigation, this suburban tantrum did not faze him. He calmly placed his heavy leather briefcase on the edge of the dining table right next to the torn pieces of the quitclaim deed I had just destroyed. He snapped the golden locks open with a sharp, satisfying click that made Brittany flinch. Susan crossed her arms tightly, her face twisting into an ugly scowl. "I want both of you out of my house right now," she demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "We are a respectable family. We do not tolerate this kind of chaotic, low-class behavior in our home." Richard slammed his fist on the table one last time, making the crystal wine glasses rattle. "This is it, Natalie," he growled, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You have officially crossed the line. This was your final ultimatum. I am calling my estate lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. You are entirely written out of the will. You will not get a penny when we die. You are no longer my daughter. Take your fake lawyer, get back into your rented luxury car, and get out of our sight. If I ever see you near this property again, I will not hesitate to have you arrested for trespassing." I stood my ground, feeling a strange sense of absolute freedom wash over me. For 34 years, I had craved their validation. I had quietly taken their abuse, hoping that one day they would see my worth. But looking at them now, blinded by their own greed and delusion, I realized I did not want their money or their love. Their threats meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. David pulled a thick stack of professionally bound documents from his briefcase and handed them to me. The paper was heavy, stamped with the official seal of my corporate firm. "Thank you, David," I said, taking the file. I turned my attention back to my father. "You do not need to call your estate lawyer Dad. I do not want your money. In fact, I am the one who is going to be saving you from absolute financial ruin, though I highly doubt you will thank me for it." Jamal burst into another fit of arrogant, booming laughter. "Financial ruin," he mocked. "You cannot even afford a decent haircut, and you are going to save us from financial ruin. I manage a crypto portfolio worth millions of dollars. I am taking this family to the absolute top of the financial food chain." I slowly opened the file and pulled out the first page. It was a certified financial forensic report. I looked directly at Jamal, watching the smug smile resting heavily on his face. "Your portfolio is a mirage, Jamal," I said, my voice completely flat and professional. "You claim Apollo Vanguard is on the verge of a massive acquisition, but according to the federal audit, my team just completed your primary liquidity pool has been entirely drained for over 3 months. Jamal stopped laughing instantly. The color drained from his face. "What did you just say?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Your company is completely bankrupt." I continued, holding the document up so he could clearly see the highlighted red figures covering the page. "You do not have millions of dollars hidden away in digital wallets. You have a massive hole of high-interest debt. You have been using my parents' retirement savings to cover your losses. You are running a textbook Ponzi scheme, Jamal, and it just collapsed right under your feet. The room fell into a dead silence for exactly 3 seconds before Jamal threw his head back and let out a booming theatrical laugh. It was a loud, forced sound that completely shattered the tension. He picked up the forensic report I had just placed on the table, glanced at the highlighted red figures with a dismissive smirk, and tossed it right back at me. It slid across the polished mahogany and hit my purse. "You are actually insane," Jamal said, shaking his head as if he was dealing with a delusional child. "This is hilarious. You actually paid someone to type this up. How much did that cost you, Natalie? Did this guy in the cheap suit print it at the local public library before he drove you here?" He aggressively pointed a finger toward the front window where the black vehicle was still idling in the driveway. "And let us talk about that car outside because this is getting embarrassing. You expect us to believe you have a private driver and a corporate attorney. It is an Uber Black. Anyone with a credit card can rent an Uber Black for $50 to make a dramatic entrance. You are so utterly desperate to look successful in front of us that you are forging fake financial documents and renting cars. It is pathetic." My father Richard let out a massive sigh of relief. The color returned to his face and he immediately bought into Jamal's narrative. "For a second there, I thought you actually had something real." My father scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "But Jamal is right. You have always been jealous of your sister. Now you are committing fraud just to ruin a family dinner." "God. Natalie, you are psychotic," Brittany added, rolling her eyes and inspecting her diamond bracelet. "You are actually forging federal documents now. Do you know that is illegal? Jamal could have you arrested for defamation. Let me explain how real wealth actually works since you clearly have no idea," Jamal said, stepping forward and puffing out his chest. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking down his nose at me. "Apollo Vanguard is not some amateur lemonade stand. We manage highly volatile, high-yield, decentralized assets across international borders. My clients are venture capitalists, elite hedge fund managers, and tech billionaires from Silicon Valley. We use complex, algorithmic trading models that your little tech support brain could never possibly comprehend." He began pacing the length of the dining room, completely in his element, putting on a show for his captive audience. My parents watched him with absolute admiration, drinking in every single word, like it was gospel. "Liquidity pools fluctuate," Jamal declared smoothly, using his best salesman voice. "That is the fundamental nature of high-yield cryptocurrency investments. Sometimes the capital is tied up in smart contracts or offshore nodes. To a broke freelancer looking at a forged spreadsheet, it might look like a deficit. But to an expert, it is just capital shifting before a massive payout. We are talking about blockchain integration. We are talking about Web3 dominance. You do not understand the terminology, let alone the math. I am the one taking the risks, making the big plays, and ensuring this entire family never has to worry about money again." My mother Susan nodded enthusiastically. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "You see, Richard, I told you she was deeply unwell. She is trying to sabotage Jamal because she cannot stand to see someone else succeed. She knows she will never have a husband like him, so she makes up these ridiculous lies. Jamal is a generous provider. You are just a bitter woman trying to tear down a successful man." I stood my ground, completely unfazed by his barrage of buzzwords. David remained perfectly still beside me, observing the family dynamic with the cold, calculating eyes of a seasoned litigator. "You can use all the tech buzzwords you want, Jamal," I said, keeping my tone completely flat. "You can talk about blockchain, decentralized finance, and smart contracts until you are blue in the face. It does not change the fundamental math. A forensic audit does not care about your charismatic sales pitch. It only cares about the ledger. And your ledger is bleeding out." "There is no federal audit," Jamal yelled, his arrogant mask slipping just a fraction to reveal the raw anger underneath. You are a freelancer who probably sets up Wi-Fi networks for retirees. You do not have the security clearance, the legal authority, or the capital to audit a multi-million-dollar crypto fund. You are nothing. My fund is completely secure. I just bought my wife a new Porsche Macan yesterday. I am taking this family to the Hamptons next month. Does that sound like a bankrupt man to you? He looked over at my parents, silently demanding their unwavering loyalty. My father immediately stood up to back him. Jamal is right, my father barked, pointing at the front door. I am done listening to your jealous delusions. Get out of my house right now. You are trying to destroy the only person who is actually bringing real wealth into this family. If you do not walk out that front door in the next 5 seconds, I will personally throw you out onto the street. Your pathetic attempts to frame a successful entrepreneur are completely over and done with. David did not even acknowledge my father's screaming. The threat of physical violence hung in the dining room, but my attorney simply adjusted his silver cufflinks and turned his back on Richard entirely. It was a masterclass in professional indifference. He reached into the compartment of his leather briefcase and pulled out a second, much larger object. It was not just a file. It was a massive leather dossier, at least 3 inches thick, secured with a heavy brass clasp and stamped with a prominent corporate seal. He handed it to me with both hands, his demeanor shifting from cold to deeply respectful. Here is the complete master file, Natalie, David said, his voice cutting through the ringing silence of the room. It contains the cross-referenced bank statements, the offshore wire transfers, and the sworn affidavits from the 3 separate federal whistleblowers. The executive board has already reviewed the findings and given you full authorization to proceed with the asset freeze. Thank you, David, I replied, taking the heavy dossier. The weight of it in my hands felt like absolute power. For my entire life, I had been the scapegoat, the punching bag, the quiet girl who absorbed their insults to keep the peace. But holding this master file, I felt an undeniable shift. I was no longer the victim of their narcissistic family dynamic. My mother, Susan, could not handle being ignored in her own home. Her face flushed purple with absolute outrage. She slammed her hands down on the dining table, knocking over her crystal wine glass. The dark red liquid spilled across the white linen tablecloth like a bleeding wound, but she did not even notice. "Excuse me," Susan shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "How dare you ignore my husband? How dare you walk into my formal dining room, disrespect our family, and hand my daughter some ridiculous prop? What is in that ridiculous binder? I demand to know what you two are plotting right now." I looked at my mother. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly out of place, and the vein in her neck was pulsing visibly. She was terrified. She masked it with anger, but I could see the panic in her eyes. For the first time in 34 years, she had zero control over me, and it was driving her insane. "It is not a prop, Mom," I said calmly, resting my hand on the thick leather cover. "This is a comprehensive forensic analysis of Jamal's financial history over the last 36 months. Every single transaction, every hidden account, every lie he has ever told you is documented right here in black and white." "That is a complete fabrication," Jamal shouted, taking a quick step toward me. He reached out to snatch the dossier from my hands, but David seamlessly stepped between us. David did not raise his hands or take a fighting stance. He simply stood there, an immovable wall of tailored charcoal wool. "I advise against touching my client or her property," David stated, his tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "If you attempt to forcefully confiscate evidence related to an active federal investigation, I will add obstruction of justice to the very long list of charges you are already facing." Jamal stopped dead in his tracks. He breathed heavily, chest heaving under his expensive suit. He looked at David, then at the massive dossier in my hands, and a flicker of genuine dread passed over his face. Richard rushed forward, pulling Jamal back by the shoulder. "Do not let them bait you," my father said, glaring at me with pure hatred. "She is bluffing. She does not have the resources to hire private investigators or federal auditors. This is all just a desperate attempt to stall the eviction. She probably printed out blank pages just to make that binder look heavy. Brittany nodded vigorously, crossing her arms tight against her chest. She is pathetic, Brittany sneered. She cannot stand the fact that Jamal is a millionaire and she is just a loser. Open it then, Natalie. If it is so real, prove it. Show us the fake papers you spent all your little freelance savings on. Susan pointed a trembling finger at the dossier. Yes, open it. Read it out loud right now. I want to hear exactly what kind of lies you have invented to destroy your sister's marriage. And when you are done, I am calling the police to have you escorted off this property. I looked around the table at the four of them. They were so confident in their shared delusion. Are you sure you want me to open this? I asked, locking eyes with my mother. Because once I do, there is no going back. Open the book, my father commanded. I nodded slowly. I unfastened the brass clasp with a sharp click. The heavy brass clasp fell open. I flipped past the executive summary and went straight to page 42. The thick parchment paper crinkled loudly in the silent dining room. I ran my index finger down a column of highlighted numbers until I found exactly what I was looking for. Let us talk about your extreme capital liquidity, Jamal, I said, not even bothering to look up from the page. On October 12th of last year, Apollo Vanguard received a wire transfer of $2.5 million from a venture capital group in Seattle. According to your public prospectus, that money was supposed to be staked in a high-yield decentralized exchange to generate a guaranteed monthly return. I turned the page. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. But that is not what happened, is it? I continued, my voice smooth and conversational. The blockchain ledger shows that exact amount was immediately funneled through 3 different shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. By the time it resurfaced in a private domestic account under your name, the total was down to $40,000. So my question for you, Jamal, as a high-level financial visionary, is this. Where did the other $2.46 million go? Jamal swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline, catching the light of the chandelier. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant crypto entrepreneur completely vanished. He looked exactly like what he was, a cornered thief terrified of being caught. You are reading fabricated numbers, Jamal stammered, his voice suddenly losing its deep resonance. Anybody can print out a spreadsheet and invent offshore accounts. You do not understand the complexities of corporate restructuring. We move capital to avoid predatory taxation. It is standard operating procedure for any elite firm dealing with international digital assets. I did not argue. I just turned another page, tracing a new line of data. Standard operating procedure, I repeated. Is it also standard operating procedure to default on your luxury penthouse lease? Because according to this legal notice from your landlord, you are 4 months behind on rent. You have been served with 3 separate eviction warnings. And last Tuesday, your personal credit cards were frozen due to severe delinquency. Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms tighter. That is a lie, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. We just renewed our lease last month. Jamal paid for the entire year in advance. He told me so himself. Look at my wrist, Natalie. He just bought me this diamond bracelet. Men who are broke do not buy diamonds. Did he buy it? I asked, finally looking up from the dossier to meet my sister's eyes. Or did he charge it to a newly opened line of credit under Mom's maiden name? Because right here on page 60, there is a record of a massive predatory loan with a 50% interest rate taken out just 2 weeks ago, and it was secured using Mom and Dad's retirement accounts as collateral. The dining room descended into absolute chaos. My mother gasped, clutching the edge of the table as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from under her. Richard turned completely pale, his eyes darting wildly between me and his son-in-law. What is she talking about? Jamal, my father demanded, his voice trembling for the first time all evening. What predatory loan? What did you do with our retirement money? You said it was locked in a guaranteed bond with a 20% yield. Jamal panicked. His chest heaved and he wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at my father, then at my mother, realizing he was losing his grip on his primary victims. He had to regain control, and the only way he knew how to do that was through explosive anger. "Are you seriously going to listen to this insane woman?" Jamal roared, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is trying to destroy our family because she hates herself. She hacked my private server. She manipulated internal documents to make me look bad. She is committing corporate espionage right in front of your eyes." He stepped aggressively toward my father, towering over him to force submission. "Richard, you know me. I am the one who brings prestige to this family. I am the one taking care of your beautiful daughter. You gave me that money to invest, and I invested it. The market is volatile right now, but it will rebound. This vindictive woman is just twisting the data to turn you against me so she can keep her precious little apartment." Susan immediately grabbed Richard's arm, her desperation overriding her logic. She could not accept that she had handed her life savings to a con artist. It was easier to believe I was a monster than to admit she had been fooled so completely. "Jamal is right," my mother cried out, glaring at me with raw hatred. "You hacked his computer. You stole his private information just to humiliate him. You are a criminal, Natalie. I cannot believe I raised such a malicious, vindictive daughter." David leaned forward slightly, his presence a calm anchor in the storm of their delusion. For the record, David stated clearly there was no hacking involved. Every document in that dossier was obtained legally through a federal court order. "A court order," Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You do not have the authority to get a court order. You are a nobody. You are a pathetic freelance computer tech." I closed the massive leather dossier and folded my hands on top of it. I looked at Jamal with a cold, hollow stare. "I am not a freelance computer tech, Jamal, and I think it is time you found out exactly who you are dealing with." I looked directly at Jamal, my expression entirely devoid of whatever familial warmth he might have expected to manipulate. "I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Aegis Security and Holdings," I said, allowing the words to sink in. "We specialize in corporate cybersecurity and high-level financial forensics for federal agencies. My company was contracted by the Securities and Exchange Commission 6 months ago to investigate a series of decentralized finance frauds. You did not get hacked, Jamal. You got audited by the federal government, and my team was the one who built the case against you." The silence that followed was absolute. Jamal's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant, fast-talking Wall Street persona dissolved in an instant, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man. He stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of a dining chair. "You," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "You are the CEO of Aegis." "Yes," I replied smoothly. "That little freelance computer hobby my family loves to mock. It turns out that securing federal contracts for financial surveillance pays significantly better than running a Ponzi scheme. I do not fix routers. I dismantle financial frauds, and yours was remarkably easy to take apart. You left a digital trail a mile wide, funneling investors' money directly into your own pockets to maintain an illusion of wealth." Brittany jumped up from her chair, her diamond bracelet clinking against the table. "Stop it!" she shrieked, pointing her manicured finger at me. "You are lying. You are a jealous, hateful liar. Jamal is brilliant. He is going to be a billionaire. He manages millions. He manages nothing, Brittany." I shot back, my patience finally evaporating. "He took Mom and Dad's retirement fund to pay off the early investors who were threatening to sue him. The money is gone. Your designer bags, your leased cars, your luxury vacations, they were all paid for with other people's stolen money. And now the music has stopped." My father, Richard, had been standing paralyzed, absorbing the shockwaves of the revelation. The realization that his golden boy son-in-law was a criminal was too much for his narcissistic ego to process. Instead of turning on Jamal, he instinctively doubled down, desperate to protect the narrative he had built. "You listen to me!" my father roared, taking a threatening step toward me. I do not care what imaginary company you claim to run. I do not care what fake federal investigation you are babbling about. Jamal is family. He is my son. He made a few aggressive investments and maybe he got overextended. That is how real business works. It requires risk. And it is my job as the patriarch of this family to protect him. He slammed his fist on the table, glaring at me with a hatred so deep it made my chest ache. If he needs capital to cover his margins, then he will get it. That is why you are going to sign over that apartment right now. It will provide the bridge loan he needs to get Apollo Vanguard back in the black. You are going to fix this, Natalie. You owe this family. I stared at him, genuinely astounded by his willful ignorance. Even faced with absolute proof of fraud, he was willing to sacrifice me to save the illusion. I am not giving Jamal a dime, I said slowly, making sure he heard every syllable. And I am certainly not signing away Grandma's apartment so you can throw it into a burning fire. You cannot force me to surrender my property to cover his crimes. My father let out a harsh, triumphant laugh. His face twisted into a cruel, mocking smile. Your property, he sneered. You still think you have a say in this? You really are stupid, Natalie. Do you think I would let you hold on to a valuable asset while your sister's husband was building an empire? I did not need you to sign the quitclaim deed today to get the money. That was just a formality to get your name off the lease so we could sell it outright. He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest with absolute arrogance. I am the executor of your grandmother's estate. My name is still technically on the master deed. When Jamal told me he needed a temporary influx of cash 3 weeks ago to secure his Web3 acquisition, I did what any good father would do. I took the deed to the bank. I took out a massive second mortgage on that apartment using it as collateral. I already gave Jamal $300,000 of the bank's money. My mother gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. Richard, what did you do? She whispered, the reality of the situation finally beginning to pierce her denial. I did what I had to do, Susan, he snapped, never taking his eyes off me. I secured our future. So you see, Natalie, you have no leverage. The bank already holds the lien on that apartment. If you do not sign the deed over so we can sell it to a developer and pay off the loan, the bank will foreclose on it anyway. You lose either way. You have nothing. He smiled, a chilling expression of absolute victory. You are completely powerless, Natalie. You always have been. He smiled, a chilling expression of absolute victory. You are completely powerless, Natalie. You always have been. I looked at my father, taking in the sheer arrogance radiating from his face. He believed that going behind my back to illegally leverage my inheritance was a masterstroke of financial genius. I am not the one who is powerless here. Dad, I said softly. You just handed $300,000 of the bank's money to a man who is currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. You tied your own primary residence to that second mortgage, did you not? Richard scoffed, crossing his arms. It is a bridge loan. Jamal is going to triple it by next quarter. No, Richard, he is not, my mother suddenly screamed. The sound was so shrill that everyone in the room physically flinched. Susan was trembling violently. Her usually composed face had completely collapsed. She grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white as she stared at Jamal with wide, horrified eyes. Susan, calm down, my father snapped, irritated that she was breaking ranks. I handled the apartment. Everything is fine. Everything is not fine. My mother shrieked, tears suddenly spilling over her mascara and running down her cheeks. She pointed a shaking finger at Jamal. Tell him what you did with my money, Jamal. Tell him right now. Jamal took a step back, his hands raised in a defensive, placating gesture. Susan, please let us not discuss private portfolio allocations right now. The market is just experiencing a minor correction. Do not use those stupid words with me, she wailed, her voice cracking. I want my money back. You promised me it was safe. What money, Susan? My father demanded, his face turning pale again. What is she talking about, Jamal? My mother collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. She sobbed heavily, the sound echoing miserably in the tense room. I gave him my retirement fund, she confessed, her voice muffled by her hands. Richard froze. He looked at his wife as if she had just grown a second head. Your what? My 401k? Susan sobbed, looking up at him with devastated eyes. I drained the entire account. $400,000. Jamal told me that if I gave it to him as seed money for Apollo Vanguard, he could guarantee a 20% monthly return. He showed me these beautiful charts, Richard. He made it sound completely foolproof. He said we would be able to buy that villa in Tuscany we always talked about. He said I would be a millionaire in less than a year. My father staggered backward, gripping the back of his chair for support, as the sheer magnitude of their ruin washed over him. You cashed out your entire 401k without telling me. We are paying massive tax penalties on that. You gave him $400,000 on top of the $300,000 I just gave him from the apartment. We were supposed to be rich, Susan cried, pointing at Jamal. He promised me. He said traditional banking was for fools, and he had the inside track on the new digital economy. I opened the dossier again, finding the exact transaction ledger. She is telling the truth, Dad, I said, reading the data out loud. 6 months ago, Susan authorized a direct wire transfer of $412,000 into a corporate account controlled by Apollo Vanguard. I looked up, meeting my mother's tear-streaked face. But you did not buy into a digital economy, Mom. You bought Brittany's lifestyle. Your retirement fund paid for her Cartier jewelry, the down payment on their leased penthouse, and a very expensive series of first-class flights to Dubai. That is a complete lie, Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. I put that capital into a decentralized liquidity protocol. It is locked in a smart contract. I cannot just withdraw it overnight. Susan, you have to understand the technology. I understand that my money is gone, she screamed, grabbing her wine glass and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending red wine splashing across the expensive wallpaper. Brittany covered her ears, looking terrified, as the reality of her husband's actions finally began to crack her deep delusion. Mom, stop it, Brittany pleaded. Jamal would never steal from us. He loves me. He loves your parents' money, Brittany, I corrected her calmly. And now it is all gone. Jamal has taken over $700,000 from this family, because he used it to pay off his older debts and fund your luxury shopping sprees. There is absolutely nothing left to recover. You are all completely broke, and it is entirely your own fault. The dining room felt like a tomb. The weight of my words crushed the remaining air out of the space. My mother was still weeping softly into her hands, the broken glass from her wine cup scattered across the floor like the shattered remains of her retirement. My father leaned heavily against the table, staring blankly at the wall, as if waiting for a punchline that would never come. Jamal stood frozen, his eyes darting toward the front door, calculating his odds of simply running away. But it was Brittany who broke the silence. The realization that her luxury lifestyle was evaporating right before her eyes finally pierced through her thick layers of entitlement. She looked at Jamal, waiting for him to deny it one last time, to promise her that the penthouse and the Porsche were safe. When Jamal looked away, avoiding her gaze, she slowly turned to me. Her expression shifted from horror to a desperate, manic, calculating look. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek and stood up straighter, adjusting her designer dress, as if preparing for a business negotiation. Okay, Brittany said, her voice shaking, but adopting that familiar, demanding tone she always used when she wanted something. Okay, so Jamal made a mistake. He trusted the wrong people in the market and got over-leveraged. It happens. That does not mean we have to lose everything. You just said you are the CEO of a major corporate security firm. You have federal contracts. You have money, Natalie. Real money. I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the mental gymnastics she was performing. A mistake, I repeated slowly. He committed wire fraud, Brittany. He stole from our parents. We can fix this, she insisted, completely ignoring my words and stepping closer to me. We just need to replace the capital before the federal auditors finalize their report. Jamal knows a private hard money lender in the city. They can approve a massive emergency loan in 24 hours to cover the deficit and pay back mom and dad. But Jamal's credit is tied up and dad's house is already leveraged. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying kind of entitlement. You need to co-sign the loan, Natalie. I blinked, wondering if I had heard her correctly. I need to co-sign a loan for the man who just defrauded our parents. Yes, Brittany snapped, stomping her foot like a petulant child. You have a pristine credit score and you own a massive company. You have the collateral. If you co-sign this loan, Jamal can pay off his immediate debts, get the SEC off his back, and keep Apollo Vanguard running until the market turns around. You can save this family right now. Suddenly, my father perked up. The paralyzing shock on his face was instantly replaced by a glimmer of toxic hope. He grabbed the edge of the table and turned toward me. She is right, Natalie. You have the assets. If you co-sign a bridge loan, we can quietly replace the retirement funds and pay off the second mortgage on the apartment. Nobody has to go to jail. We can handle this privately as a family. My mother looked up, her mascara smeared across her cheeks. Please, Natalie, she begged, her voice trembling. You have to save us. You cannot let your sister lose her home. You cannot let your father and me go bankrupt. You have the power to fix all of this right now. I looked at the four of them. 10 minutes ago, I was a pathetic freeloader who embarrassed them. I was a worthless spinster they were trying to legally evict from my own home. My father had literally threatened to throw me out onto the street. My mother had called me a vindictive monster. Brittany had mocked my career. Jamal had laughed in my face. And now, the very second they realized I held the keys to their salvation, they expected me to happily sacrifice myself to clean up their criminal mess. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest. I tried to suppress it, but the sheer, breathtaking audacity of their demand was too much. A quiet chuckle escaped my lips. Then another. Within seconds, I was laughing out loud. It was not a polite laugh. It was a deep, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the dining room. I laughed until my ribs ached. David stood silently beside me, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. My family stared at me as if I had lost my mind. Stop laughing, Brittany screamed, her face turning bright red. Our lives are falling apart, and you are laughing. I finally caught my breath, looking at my sister with absolute disgust. I am laughing, Brittany, because you are completely out of your mind. I am not co-signing a loan for a criminal. I am not risking a single dime of my company to bail out a man I am currently helping the federal government investigate. You have to, my father roared. You owe us. We raised you. I owe you nothing, I snapped. You gambled your lives away on a con artist because you were too greedy to see the truth. And if you think Jamal just made a simple market mistake, you are even more delusional than I thought. I think it is time you saw exactly what your retirement fund actually paid for. I turned to David and gave him a brief nod. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, sleek device. It was a high-definition portable laser projector. He set it on the mahogany table right next to the torn quitclaim deed. With a few taps on his smartphone, the device powered on. A bright rectangle of light cut through the dim room, casting a massive image against the blank wall next to the china cabinet. Jamal lunged forward, his face contorted in panic. Turn that off right now, he shouted, waving his arms. You do not have the right to display my financial records. This is illegal. David simply stepped into his path, his commanding presence acting as an impenetrable barrier. Jamal crashed into David's chest, but bounced off, unable to move the attorney. The first image flashed onto the wall in glaring high definition. It was a consolidated bank statement from a major national bank blown up to 6 feet tall. The official bank watermarks were undeniably authentic. Let us start with the basics, I said, pointing at the wall. This is Apollo Vanguard's primary operating account. Take a good look at the balance at the top of the screen. The room was dead silent as my parents squinted at the massive numbers projected over their floral wallpaper. The current available balance was negative $12,000. Now let us look at the deposit history, I continued. David swiped his screen and a new document appeared. Here is the $412,000 wire transfer from Mom's retirement account on October 12th. And right below it is the $300,000 deposit from the second mortgage Dad took out on Grandma's apartment 3 weeks ago. My mother let out a strangled gasp. Seeing the numbers on a massive wall made the loss violently real. But where did the money go, I asked, pacing in front of the projection. Did it buy high-yield blockchain assets like Jamal promised? David swiped the screen again. A categorized expense report illuminated the room filled with red deductions. No, I answered my own question. It went to a luxury car dealership, specifically $140,000 for a custom Porsche Macan. It went to high-end retail stores, $80,000 at designer boutiques over the last 6 months. Brittany swallowed hard. Her hand instinctively reached up to touch her diamond necklace. She stared at the screen, her eyes tracing the exact dates of the transactions. They perfectly aligned with her recent shopping sprees. It gets better, I said. There are multiple cash withdrawals. Tens of thousands of dollars pulled out from ATMs near high-stakes casinos in Las Vegas during Jamal's supposed business trips. And here is my personal favorite. Another swipe. A commercial lease agreement appeared on the wall. A luxury penthouse downtown leased for $15,000 a month. What is incredibly interesting is that the massive security deposit and the first 3 months of rent were paid using the exact funds Dad transferred from the apartment mortgage. You did not make a bad investment, Jamal. You took their money, moved it into your personal checking account, and spent it like you won the lottery. Jamal was sweating profusely. He tugged violently at his collar. This is manipulated data, he shouted, his voice cracking. Anyone can make a graphic and project it on a wall. It is fake. Do not look at it, Richard. It is a direct data feed from the federal subpoena, I replied coldly. The bank routing numbers and timestamps match perfectly. There is no crypto portfolio, Jamal. There is only a mountain of debt and a trail of stolen cash. My father walked slowly toward the wall. The absolute certainty of the bank statements was impossible to deny. The fantasy he had built his entire ego upon was disintegrating before his eyes. Is this true? My father whispered, his voice completely hollow. Did you take my money to buy clothes and cars? Richard, you have to listen to me, Jamal pleaded, backing away toward the hallway. I had to maintain a certain image to attract high-level investors. The cars, the clothes, the penthouse, they were necessary business expenses. You have to look successful to be successful. I was going to pay you back as soon as the next round of funding came through. By stealing more money from new investors to pay off the old ones, I interjected. That is the literal definition of a Ponzi scheme. Brittany was shaking uncontrollably. Wait, she said, her voice fragile. The penthouse is a business expense. What does that mean? Are we going to be evicted? I looked at my sister, feeling absolutely no sympathy for her shattered delusions. You are already being evicted, Brittany. But losing your apartment is the least of your problems. That is not even the worst part of what your husband has been spending this family's money on. I turned back to the projection illuminating the dining room wall. David tapped his screen again. A new set of bank statements materialized, highlighting a series of recurring wire transfers. They were flagged in bright yellow. These transfers were not going to luxury car dealerships or high-end retail stores. They were going to a private checking account. The name on the receiving account was Amber Hayes. Brittany narrowed her eyes, stepping closer to the wall. Who is Amber Hayes? She asked, her voice tight. Is she an investor? Is this a vendor for the company? Jamal let out a strange, strangled noise. He lunged toward David, his hands reaching blindly for the projector. Turn that off! He yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. That is confidential corporate data. You have absolutely no right to show this. David simply shifted his weight, blocking Jamal with effortless professionalism. Amber is not an investor, Brittany, I said calmly, keeping my eyes fixed on my sister. According to the surveillance reports my team filed last week, Amber is a 24-year-old fitness instructor who lives in a luxury townhouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. A townhouse that your husband currently pays the lease for. The color completely drained from Brittany's face. She stared at the highlighted transfers, her lips parting as she tried to form words that refused to come out. Let us look at the memos attached to these transfers. I continued pointing at the screen. David zoomed in on the document. Over the last 8 months, Jamal has transferred roughly $90,000 to Amber. The transaction notes include phrases like weekend getaway, happy anniversary baby, and a $10,000 charge at a high-end jeweler just last Tuesday. I looked down at Brittany's wrist, where the diamond bracelet she had been flaunting all evening caught the light. That is a beautiful bracelet, Brittany. Did Jamal tell you he bought it for you just because it was Tuesday? Because, according to these receipts, he actually bought 2 identical bracelets that day, one for his wife and one for his mistress, using the exact same stolen retirement funds he took from our parents. The silence in the dining room was so absolute it felt heavy. The only sound was the soft humming of the laser projector. Jamal stood frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. He had played the confident, successful crypto entrepreneur all night, but right now, he just looked pathetic. "You are lying," Brittany whispered, shaking her head. Her perfectly curated world was collapsing in real time. She turned slowly to look at Jamal. "Tell me she is lying, Jamal. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." Jamal opened his mouth, but no words came out. The slick salesman charm had completely evaporated. He raised his hands in a weak, placating gesture. "Brittany, listen to me," he stammered. "It is not what it looks like. I can explain everything. She is just a consultant." "A consultant?" my mother shrieked, suddenly finding her voice. "You spent my retirement money on a mistress. You stole our future to buy diamonds for some girl while my daughter defended you." Brittany let out a sound I had never heard her make before. It was a visceral, agonizing scream. She lunged at Jamal, her manicured hands turning into fists as she slammed them against his chest. "How could you do this to me?" she sobbed, hitting him over and over again. "I gave you everything. I defended you to my family. I let you manage our money. You promised me we were going to be rich." Jamal grabbed her wrists, struggling to hold her back. "Brittany, stop it!" he hissed, his anger finally breaking through his panic. "You wanted the lifestyle. You wanted the clothes and the cars and the penthouse. Did you ever actually ask how I was paying for it? No. You just swiped the cards and looked the other way. Do not act like you are completely innocent in this." My father stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. He grabbed Jamal by the collar of his tailored suit and violently shoved him backward against the wall. "Do not you dare speak to my daughter that way!" Richard roared, his face purple with rage. "You are a con artist and a thief. You destroyed my family. You took the only asset we had left." I watched the 3 of them tear each other apart. The narcissistic family structure that had kept me trapped and belittled for 34 years was completely imploding. They had built their entire identities on the illusion of wealth and superiority. And now it was all crumbling down. I watched the 3 of them tear each other apart. The narcissistic family structure that had kept me trapped and belittled for 34 years was completely imploding. They had built their entire identities on the illusion of wealth and superiority. And now it was all crumbling down. My father released his grip on Jamal, shoving him away with a look of utter disgust. Jamal stumbled backwards, straightening his ruined suit jacket, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. But before he could make a run for it, Brittany stepped between them. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she stared at the massive projection on the wall. The glowing letters of Amber Hayes and her bank account details seemed to burn into the room. Suddenly, Brittany let out a sharp, breathless laugh. She turned away from the wall and faced me, her expression twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated denial. She shook her head, strands of her perfect blonde hair sticking to her tear-stained cheeks. "It is fake," Brittany announced, her voice eerily calm compared to the screaming just moments ago. She looked around the room, making eye contact with our mother and father. Mom, Dad, listen to me. Do not let her do this to us. Do not let her win. It is all fake. Susan sniffled, clutching a napkin to her chest. What are you talking about, Brittany? The bank statements are right there on the wall. No, they are not, Brittany insisted, pointing a manicured finger at me. Think about it. Natalie sits at a computer all day. That is her entire job. She knows how to use Photoshop. She knows how to manipulate digital files. She has always been obsessed with ruining my life. She fabricated these documents to frame Jamal because she is completely obsessed with destroying my happiness. I stared at my sister, genuinely stunned by the depth of her delusion. I knew she was the golden child insulated from reality her entire life, but this was a whole new level of psychological detachment. You think I photoshopped federal bank subpoenas? I asked, my voice flat. You think I invented a 24-year-old fitness instructor just to make you mad? Yes, Brittany shrieked, the eerie calm shattering into a million pieces. You have always been jealous of me. You hated that I got the attention. You hated that Mom and Dad loved me more. You hated that I married a rich, handsome man while you stayed single and pathetic in Grandma's dusty old apartment. You created this entire elaborate lie to steal my husband's money and destroy my marriage. I let out a heavy sigh, realizing that facts and logic would never penetrate the fortress of her entitlement. I signaled David. He tapped his screen one more time. The bank statements vanished from the wall, replaced by a series of high-resolution photographs. They were surveillance photos taken outside the Gold Coast townhouse. Clear, undeniable images of Jamal walking hand in hand with a young brunette in yoga pants. Jamal kissing the brunette on the cheek. Jamal handing the brunette a small velvet jewelry box. The exact same jewelry box that held Brittany's Tuesday diamond bracelet. Did I Photoshop the reflections in the car windows too? I asked coldly. Did I Photoshop the timestamp from the security camera? Wake up, Brittany. Your dream life was funded by a criminal who used our parents' retirement money to buy a mistress. You are broke. You are wearing stolen goods. The photographs broke whatever fragile tether Brittany still had to reality. She let out a feral, ear-piercing scream. Her eyes went completely wild. She grabbed a heavy silver candlestick from the center of the dining table and lunged directly at me. I am going to kill you, she shrieked, swinging the solid metal object at my head. I barely had time to react, stepping backward as the heavy silver candlestick swooped inches from my face. Before she could swing again, David moved with terrifying speed. He stepped forward, caught Brittany's wrist mid-air, and twisted it downward with expert precision. The candlestick clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. Let me go, Brittany screamed, thrashing wildly against David's iron grip. Let me go. She ruined everything. I am going to rip her face off. David held her firmly, completely unbothered by her hysterical struggling. If you attempt to strike my client again, I will break your wrist, he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. And then I will have you arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. My mother rushed forward, hovering nervously, but too afraid to intervene against David. Please, she cried out. She is just upset. Let her go. Do not hurt her. David released Brittany with a slight shove backward. She stumbled, collapsing into Jamal's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Jamal held her, but his eyes were fixed on me, burning with a desperate, cornered hatred. The physical violence had failed. The denial had failed. There was nowhere left for them to hide. Or so I thought. Narcissists never truly surrender. When they are backed into a corner and stripped of their lies, they simply invent a new reality. Jamal gently pushed Brittany aside, ignoring her hysterical sobs. He smoothed the lapels of his ruined suit jacket and stood up straight, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. I am not doing this, Jamal announced, his voice trembling but loud enough to command the room. I am not going to stand here and let some bitter, jealous freelancer destroy my family and my corporate reputation with illegally fabricated documents. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his expensive smartphone. He looked at my father, who was still leaning against the wall in shock. Richard, Get your wife and your daughter away from her, Jamal ordered, pointing a finger at me. She is unstable. She has crossed the line from petty family jealousy into felony cyber hacking and corporate espionage. I am putting an end to this right now. My father blinked, desperate for any lifeline that would rescue his ego from the humiliation of being conned. You are calling the police? My father asked, his voice wavering. I am calling the authorities, Jamal corrected him pompously. What Natalie just confessed to is a federal crime. She admitted to bypassing my secure corporate servers. She projected illegally obtained financial data and forged bank statements. She is trying to extort us and ruin a multi-million-dollar financial institution. She is going to federal prison for this. Susan grabbed Richard's arm, her face lighting up with a sudden toxic hope. Yes, my mother gasped. Yes, she hacked his computer. That is illegal. She stole his private information to make up these horrible lies. Call the police, Jamal. Have her arrested. She deserves to be locked up for what she is doing to her sister. Presented with irrefutable proof that Jamal had stolen their entire life savings to buy a Porsche and a mistress, my parents chose to weaponize their anger against me instead. Jamal furiously tapped the screen of his phone and held it to his ear. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the dispatcher answer on the other end. Yes, I have an emergency, Jamal said into the phone using his deep, authoritative executive voice. I need police dispatched immediately to this address. I am dealing with a severe case of corporate espionage and cyber terrorism. A woman has illegally breached my company's servers and is currently holding my family hostage with forged federal documents. Yes, she is highly unstable. She already tried to physically attack my wife. I looked at David. My attorney simply raised an eyebrow and subtly checked the silver watch on his wrist. Yes, please send your officers right away. Jamal continued pacing back and forth in the dining room to look important. Her name is Natalie. She is a rogue IT freelancer. She is claiming to be part of a federal investigation, which is a complete fabrication. I am a high-net-worth portfolio manager, and she is attempting to extort my family. Jamal hung up the phone and shoved it back into his pocket. He looked at me with a smug, triumphant grin. The fear from moments ago was entirely gone. They are on their way, Jamal sneered. You played a stupid game, Natalie, and now you are going to lose everything. When the police get here, I am pressing full charges. I will have my corporate legal team bury you so deep in the federal system you will never see daylight again. My father nodded aggressively, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Jamal. You brought this on yourself, Natalie, my father barked. We are going to tell the police exactly what you did. I am going to make sure they put you in handcuffs. Brittany spat from the floor, wiping her ruined makeup. You are a psychopath. You are going to rot in jail. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice or try to defend myself. I just reached over to the table and calmly closed the heavy leather dossier. You know, Jamal, I said, keeping my voice completely relaxed. Calling the police is actually the first smart financial decision you have made all year. It saves my team the trouble of tracking you down. A few minutes later, the distant wail of sirens pierced the quiet suburban night. The sound grew louder and louder, echoing down our affluent street, until the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dining room windows. Jamal smiled, adjusting his tie one last time. Your ride is here, he mocked. Let us see how tough you act when you are sitting in the back of a squad car. Jamal smiled, adjusting his tie one last time. Your ride is here, he mocked. Let us see how tough you act when you are sitting in the back of a squad car. The heavy oak front door of my parents' house echoed with a series of sharp, authoritative knocks. It was not the casual tap of a neighbor. It was a firm, demanding sound that vibrated through the hallway. Jamal puffed out his chest and marched out of the dining room with the confident stride of a CEO about to fire an insubordinate employee. My father was right on his heels, his face flushed with the anticipation of finally seeing me punished. My mother grabbed Brittany by the arm and pulled her along, eager to witness the spectacle of my arrest. I did not move. I stayed right where I was standing next to David, who calmly snapped his leather briefcase shut. The metallic click sounded like a judge dropping a gavel. From the dining room, I had a perfect view of the foyer. Jamal grabbed the brass handle of the front door and pulled it open with a dramatic flourish. "Good evening, officers," Jamal announced in his booming, practiced voice. "Thank you so much for your incredibly prompt response. I am the one who called. The perpetrator is right in here." Jamal's confident greeting was met with absolute silence. The people standing on my parents' front porch were not local police officers responding to a domestic disturbance call. There were no standard blue uniforms. There were no local badges. Instead, three imposing figures stepped into the brightly lit foyer without waiting for an invitation. The first two were tall, broad-shouldered men wearing dark suits and navy blue windbreakers. Emblazoned across the back and chest of those windbreakers in bold yellow lettering were the letters FBI. Hanging from lanyards around their necks were federal badges that caught the porch light. Behind them stood a sharp-looking woman in a gray pantsuit carrying a thick metallic clipboard. Her badge identified her as an investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. Jamal blinked, his arrogant smile freezing into a mask of pure confusion. He looked at the FBI windbreakers, then down at the badges, and finally up at the stern faces of the federal agents. For a brief, delusional moment, his narcissistic brain tried to process the scene in a way that still made him the hero. "Wow," Jamal said, letting out a nervous chuckle. "I am incredibly impressed. I knew my company had significant financial influence, but I did not realize local dispatch would instantly escalate a corporate espionage complaint straight to the federal level. That is fantastic response time." The lead FBI agent, a man with a graying mustache and eyes as cold as stone, looked at Jamal as if he were a completely foreign species of insect. He stepped further into the house, forcing Jamal to awkwardly back up against the hallway table. "Are you Jamal Henderson?" the lead agent asked. His voice was deep, flat, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Yes, sir, I am," Jamal answered proudly, straightening his posture. "I am the founder and managing director of Apollo Vanguard, and the woman you need to arrest is standing right over there in the dining room. She has illegally breached my corporate servers and is currently attempting to extort my family with fabricated banking records." My father stepped up next to Jamal, eager to contribute to my downfall. "That is right," Richard added, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "She is my daughter, but I want her removed from my property immediately. She is completely out of control. She has been threatening my son-in-law all evening." The federal agents completely ignored my father. They did not even glance in my direction. The lead agent pulled a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of his windbreaker and opened it slowly. "Jamal Henderson," the agent stated, reading from the document. "We are not here responding to a dispatch call. We are here executing a federal warrant issued by the United States District Court." Jamal furrowed his brow, the fake confidence finally beginning to crack. "A warrant," he repeated, his voice losing its booming resonance. "A warrant for what? The hack? Are you here to confiscate her laptop?" The woman from the IRS stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "No, Mr. Henderson," she said, her tone sharp and precise. "We are here to confiscate your assets. We have a federal injunction to immediately freeze all bank accounts, safety deposit boxes, and digital wallets associated with Apollo Vanguard and your personal name." Jamal staggered backward in pure shock. "What are you saying now?" he stammered. "There must be a misunderstanding." "Wait," Jamal staggered backward in pure shock. "What are you saying now?" he stammered. "There must be a misunderstanding." "Wait." My parents watched the exchange from the dining room, their faces twisting with a bizarre mixture of confusion and desperate denial. The reality of federal agents standing in their foyer with an asset freeze injunction was entirely incompatible with the reality they had built. In their minds, Jamal was the successful financial genius who was going to elevate our family to the upper echelons of society. He could not be a criminal. Therefore, someone else had to be to blame for this sudden nightmare. And in my family, that someone was always me. My father pushed past Jamal and marched directly up to the lead FBI agent. His face was red and he puffed out his chest, trying to use his booming voice to reclaim control of his house. "Excuse me, Officer," Richard said, using his most condescending tone. "You are making a massive mistake. You have the wrong information. My son-in-law is an outstanding citizen. He manages a highly successful investment portfolio. The only criminal in this house is standing right there." Richard turned and pointed a shaking finger directly at me. I stood calmly beside David, watching my father willingly throw me to the wolves to protect a man who had literally stolen his retirement fund. "That woman is my daughter, Natalie." Richard continued, his voice echoing in the foyer. "She is deeply unstable. She is completely jealous of her sister's success and her happy marriage. For the last hour, she has been in my dining room bragging about how she hacked into my son-in-law's secure computer network. She showed us fake bank statements on a projector. She is trying to ruin him because she is a bitter, lonely spinster who has accomplished absolutely nothing with her life." My mother, Susan, rushed forward to join my father. She grabbed the sleeve of the second FBI agent, her eyes wide with performative panic. "It is true," Susan pleaded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You have to believe us. Natalie has always been like this. She is incredibly vindictive. She cannot stand the fact that Brittany found a wonderful provider. She works with computers all day. She told us she used her skills to manipulate Jamal's digital records and trick the federal government. She even tried to physically attack my youngest daughter just a few minutes ago." Brittany stood safely behind my mother, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She nodded vigorously, playing the part of the traumatized victim flawlessly. "She is a psychopath," Brittany whispered loudly enough for the agents to hear. "She said she was going to destroy my marriage and take everything we own. You need to arrest her." She confessed to cyber terrorism right in front of us. The three federal agents stood perfectly still, absorbing the chaotic barrage of accusations without flinching. They did not reach for their handcuffs. They did not even look at me. They simply stared at my parents with expressions of profound professional exhaustion. Jamal, realizing my parents were aggressively fighting his battle for him, quickly regained a fraction of his slick composure. He adjusted his collar and stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with my father. "Listen to them," Jamal said smoothly, gesturing toward my parents. "These are respectable people. They have known Natalie her entire life. They know how dangerous she is. I assure you my company is entirely solvent. Any irregularities your agency thinks they found were directly caused by Natalie's malicious cyber attacks. If you check her laptop right now, I guarantee you will find the source code she used to fabricate this entire investigation." My father nodded enthusiastically. "She is the one you want. Arrest her and get out of my house." The lead FBI agent slowly looked from my father to my mother to Brittany, and finally settled his cold gaze on Jamal. He did not look angry. He just looked deeply unimpressed. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," the agent said, his voice deadly quiet. "You are telling me that a freelance IT worker hacked into a multi-million-dollar crypto fund, fabricated 3 years of complex financial data, intercepted international wire transfers, forged a federal judge's signature on a subpoena, and somehow convinced the United States Department of Justice to issue a federal raid, all because she is jealous of her sister?" "Yes," my mother cried out. "That is exactly what happened. She is evil." The agent slowly shook his head. He looked at the IRS investigator, who simply rolled her eyes and marked something on her clipboard. "Mr. Henderson," the lead agent said, turning his attention back to Jamal, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jamal's jaw dropped. "What? No. Did you not hear them? She is the hacker." The agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Put your hands behind your back, Mr. Henderson. We are well aware of who Natalie is. And you are about to find out exactly how much trouble you are in." Jamal took a massive step backward, physically recoiling from the sight of the steel handcuffs. He let out a loud, forced laugh that echoed artificially in the foyer. He raised his hands not in submission, but in a gesture of arrogant dismissal. "Whoa, let us pause for a second," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. He smoothed the front of his tailored suit jacket, ignoring the federal agent holding the restraints. "There is obviously a massive miscommunication happening here. You guys are coming in hot, and I appreciate the enthusiasm. But you are pointing your weapons at the wrong target." He casually reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket. The second agent instantly dropped his hand to his weapon, his stance widening. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the second agent barked. Jamal rolled his eyes, a smirk playing on his lips. "Relax," Officer Jamal sighed. "I am just getting my card. I am not some street thug. I am a high-net-worth portfolio manager." He pulled out a sleek leather card holder. With a flick of his wrist, he extracted a heavy card made of matte black metal, embossed with shiny gold lettering. He held it out toward the lead agent with the supreme confidence of a man who believed his money made him untouchable. "Take it," Jamal commanded, thrusting the card forward. "Read the name. I am the founder and CEO of Apollo Vanguard. We manage hundreds of millions of dollars in decentralized assets. I sit on the advisory boards of 3 tech startups in Silicon Valley. I play golf with state senators and hedge fund managers. Do you have any idea how much capital flows through my firm daily?" The lead agent did not take the card. He just looked at it, his expression remaining blank. Jamal withdrew his hand, slightly offended by the lack of deference. "Listen to me very carefully." Jamal continued, his tone shifting from arrogant to vaguely threatening. "My legal team is on retainer in New York. If you put those handcuffs on me, my lawyers will have you buried in civil lawsuits before you finish your shift. You will be directing traffic in a mall parking lot by the end of the week. You are making a career-ending mistake because you are listening to a jealous woman." He pointed his heavy metal business card directly at me. "Look at her," Jamal demanded, raising his voice. "She is a freelance computer technician. She sits in a tiny apartment fixing basic software glitches. She has 0 assets and 0 influence. She is just a bitter, lonely spinster who cannot stand the fact that her younger sister married a successful man. She fabricated this entire story to ruin my family." My father, completely blinded by his need to be associated with wealth, nodded enthusiastically. "Jamal is telling the truth." Richard insisted, stepping forward. "You are targeting an innocent entrepreneur. My son-in-law is a pillar of this community. He provides for this family. You should put those handcuffs on Natalie. She committed corporate espionage. She is the one trying to tear us apart." Jamal smiled, emboldened by my father supporting his delusional narrative. He took another step toward the lead agent, invading the personal space of the federal officer. "I am not going to ask you again," Jamal said, his voice low and dangerous. "Put the handcuffs away, go into that dining room, confiscate her laptop, and arrest her for cyber terrorism. If you do that right now, I will forget this mix-up ever happened. I might even put in a good word for you with the police commissioner. But if you touch me, I will make sure you lose your badge." The IRS investigator standing behind the FBI agents let out a quiet snort of amusement. She tapped her pen against her metallic clipboard, shaking her head. Jamal snapped his attention to her. "You think this is funny?" he barked. "You think a massive corporate lawsuit is a joke? I have the best defense attorneys in the country on speed dial." The lead FBI agent finally moved. He slowly reached out and took the heavy metal business card from Jamal. He held it up to the porch light, examining the shiny gold lettering. "Apollo Vanguard." The agent read aloud, his voice perfectly calm. "That is a very impressive piece of metal, Mr. Henderson. It must have cost a fortune to print these." "It is titanium," Jamal corrected him smugly. "And yes, it did. It projects absolute authority, something you lack the capacity to understand. I demand that you arrest that woman right now and get out of my house." The lead agent lowered the card. He looked Jamal dead in the eye for a long moment. The lead agent lowered the card. He looked Jamal dead in the eye for a long moment. Then, with a deliberate flick of his wrist, he let the heavy titanium card slip from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter, sliding across the polished oak until it hit the baseboard. Jamal stared at it, his jaw tightening in sheer disbelief. Nobody had ever treated his prop of wealth with such blatant disrespect before. Mr. Henderson, the lead agent, said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. "Do you have any idea who this woman actually is?" Jamal sneered, pointing at me again. "I told you who she is. She is a nobody. She fixes computers for a living. She is a freelancer who got jealous and hacked my system." The agent let out a heavy sigh, exchanging a look with the IRS investigator that screamed pure exhaustion. "No, Mr. Henderson," the agent corrected him. "She is the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Security and Holdings. She does not fix computers. She builds the cybersecurity infrastructure that the United States government uses to track international financial terrorism." 2 weeks ago, the Securities and Exchange Commission formally contracted her firm to investigate a massive liquidity gap in your so-called cryptocurrency fund. My father stepped back, his mouth hanging open. "What are you saying?" Richard stammered, looking from the agent to me. "Natalie, what is he talking about?" The agent did not let me answer. He kept his steely gaze locked on my father. "I am saying, sir, that your daughter did not hack anyone. She was legally granted full administrative access to Apollo Vanguard servers by a federal judge. The documents she showed you tonight were not fabricated in Photoshop. They were pulled directly from Mr. Henderson's encrypted offshore accounts using a federal subpoena." Jamal shook his head violently, taking another step back until his shoulders hit the wall. "No, that is impossible," Jamal choked out. "I use military-grade encryption. I routed those transactions through 3 different decentralized networks. There is no way a suburban IT girl cracked that." The IRS investigator stepped forward, stepping right on top of Jamal's titanium business card with her sharp heels. "You routed them through networks that her company actually built and monitors," the investigator said sharply. "You left a digital footprint so wide we could have tracked it with a magnifying glass. We have been watching you siphon investor funds into your personal accounts for 6 months. We watched you drain your in-laws' retirement fund. We watched you lease a penthouse and buy luxury vehicles while your primary liquidity pool evaporated." Brittany let out a loud sob, burying her face in her hands. She finally understood that no amount of screaming or denial would make the federal agents disappear. Her husband was not a misunderstood visionary. He was a cornered criminal, and the men with the badges were not leaving without him. "But I know people," Jamal pleaded, his arrogant facade completely shattering into pathetic desperation. He looked at the lead FBI agent with wild, terrified eyes. "I have powerful clients. I can make restitution. Just give me 48 hours. I can liquidate some assets and pay everyone back. You do not need to do this. We can settle this quietly." "You cannot liquidate assets you do not have," the IRS investigator replied coldly. "Every single bank account associated with your name, your wife's name, and your corporate entity was frozen by the Federal Reserve exactly 12 minutes ago. You do not have a dime to your name, Mr. Henderson, and neither does your company." Jamal collapsed against the wall, sliding down slightly as the sheer weight of his ruin crushed him. The multi-million-dollar crypto empire, the expensive suits, the sports cars, the lavish lifestyle, it was all gone in the blink of an eye. He looked at my parents, who were staring at him with absolute horror. "Richard, do something," Jamal begged, his voice cracking. "Call a lawyer. Tell them I am family." My father did not move. He stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his retirement fund used to be. The man he had idolized, the man he had chosen over his own daughter, was begging for mercy on the floor of his foyer. The second FBI agent stepped forward and grabbed Jamal by the arm, hauling him back to his feet. "Jamal Henderson, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion," the agent recited, spinning Jamal around and snapping the heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly in the silent house. Susan screamed, grabbing her chest. "You cannot take him," my mother wailed. "What about our money? He has our money." The lead agent looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "Your money is gone, ma'am. And based on what I just heard, you willingly gave it to a man running a Ponzi scheme. I highly suggest you contact a bankruptcy attorney first thing tomorrow morning." The lead agent firmly gripped Jamal by the bicep and marched him toward the open front door. Jamal stumbled over his own expensive leather shoes, his previous swagger completely replaced by the panicked shuffling of a defeated man. The second agent followed closely behind, keeping a watchful eye, while the IRS investigator paused just long enough to hand my father a formal notice of the asset freeze. She did not say another word. She simply turned on her heel and walked out into the cool night air. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them with a resounding thud that seemed to shake the entire house. Through the front windows, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the driveway one last time before the federal vehicles pulled away, taking the golden child's husband straight to a holding cell. The silence that settled over the foyer was absolute and deafening. It was the sound of a carefully curated illusion shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Brittany remained on the floor, her designer dress wrinkled, and her perfect hair in disarray. She stared blankly at the front door, her mind completely unable to process the speed at which her luxurious life had just been dismantled. Susan leaned heavily against the hallway table, clutching the IRS document to her chest, as if it were a physical wound. Richard finally turned his head slowly to look at me. His face was a mask of utter bewilderment. The vein in his forehead was still pulsing, but the aggressive fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a deep, profound confusion. "What did that federal agent just say?" my father asked, his voice barely more than a dry whisper. He looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just broken into his house. "He said you own the company that investigated Jamal. He said you have federal contracts." I did not answer him immediately. I simply stood there feeling the immense weight of their lifelong judgment finally lifting off my shoulders. I looked at David, giving him a slight nod. David stepped forward, smoothing the lapels of his charcoal suit. His posture was impeccable, projecting the kind of genuine quiet authority that Jamal had spent his entire life pretending to possess. "Allow me to formally introduce my client, David," said his voice ringing clearly in the quiet foyer. "For the past 6 years, you have operated under the assumption that Natalie is a struggling freelance computer technician. That assumption was entirely incorrect. Natalie is the sole founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of Aegis Security and Holdings." My father blinked repeatedly, trying to force the words to make sense in his rigid, narcissistic brain. "Aegis Security," Richard repeated numbly. "I have read about them in the Wall Street Journal. They handle cyber defense for major banking institutions." "That is correct," David continued calmly. "Aegis is a premier cybersecurity and financial forensics firm. They secure the digital infrastructure for 3 of the largest banks in North America, as well as multiple federal agencies. When the Securities and Exchange Commission detects a massive financial anomaly, they do not call the local police. They call Natalie. She built the company from the ground up entirely on her own, without a single dollar of outside investment from this family." Susan let out a sharp gasp, her eyes darting between me and David. "But you work from home," my mother stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You wear old sweaters. You do not drive a luxury car. You live in your grandmother's old apartment. How can you possibly run a company like that?" "Because real wealth does not need to scream for attention." "Mom," I said, finally speaking up, "real wealth does not require leased penthouses, flashy sports cars, or diamond bracelets bought with stolen retirement funds. I worked from home because my company operates globally in the digital space. I kept Grandma's apartment because it holds sentimental value, not because I could not afford to move. And I never told you about my success because I knew exactly how you would react." I took a step closer to my parents, looking them dead in the eye. "If I had told you I was a multimillionaire 5 years ago, you would have demanded that I fund Jamal's non-existent empire. You would have expected me to pay for Brittany's lifestyle. You would have used my success to brag to your country club friends while continuing to treat me like a bank. I chose peace over your conditional approval." David opened his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a single sheet of embossed paper and handed it directly to my father. As the executive director of wealth management for Aegis, David stated, "I oversee Natalie's personal portfolio. Her current verified net worth is in excess of $250 million. She is the wealthiest person you will ever meet. And tonight you tried to illegally evict her from a rent-controlled apartment." Richard stared at the official wealth management document in his trembling hands. The paper confirmed everything David had just said. The daughter he had spent 34 years calling a failure, the daughter he had just threatened to throw out onto the street, possessed a level of financial power he could not even begin to comprehend. Richard stared at the official wealth management document in his trembling hands. The paper confirmed everything David had just said. The daughter he had spent 34 years calling a failure, the daughter he had just threatened to throw out onto the street, possessed a level of financial power he could not even begin to comprehend. My father slowly lowered the paper. The aggressive posture he had maintained all evening completely vanished, replaced by the hollow, sunken look of a man whose entire worldview had just been detonated. He looked up at me, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to reconcile the woman standing in front of him with the pathetic caricature he had built in his mind. $250 million, Richard whispered the words catching in his throat. You have had this kind of money all along, and you let us sit here and worry about the family finances. You let Jamal step up as the provider when you could have paid off our house with pocket change. I shook my head, genuinely amazed by his ability to twist reality. Jamal was never a provider, Dad. He was a parasite. And I did not let you worry about finances. You chose to hand your life savings to a con artist because he stroked your ego and promised you a shortcut to high society. You never once asked me for financial advice because you were too busy mocking my career. Susan suddenly stepped forward, her eyes wide and shining with a brand new, terrifying kind of desperation. She pushed past Brittany and reached out to grab my hands, but I took a step back, letting her hands fall to her sides. "Natalie, sweetheart." My mother pleaded, her voice thick with fake affection. "We did not know. If you had just told us you were running a massive corporation, we would have celebrated you. We would have treated you with the respect you deserve. But you have to understand, you terrified us tonight. You came in here and hacked Jamal's computer systems. You cannot just use your power to destroy your sister's husband out of spite. You have to tell the police that you fabricated the evidence. If you are really this wealthy, you can hire lawyers to fix all of this." Brittany finally snapped out of her shock. The mention of my wealth seemed to reboot her narcissistic programming. She wiped her face and glared at me with pure venom. "She bribed them," Brittany hissed, pointing an accusing finger. "That is what happened. She used her millions to bribe a judge and frame Jamal. There is no federal investigation. She paid someone to make those fake bank statements so she could steal my husband's money and look like the hero." David let out a heavy sigh, adjusting his glasses. "The sheer volume of willful ignorance in this room is staggering," my attorney muttered. I held up a hand, silencing my family before their delusions could spiral any further. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice cutting through the foyer like ice. "I did not bribe anyone. I did not frame anyone. And I absolutely did not hack Jamal." I walked over to the dining table and picked up the heavy leather dossier I had placed there earlier. I opened it and pulled out a document bearing the official seal of the United States District Court. I held it up for them to see. "This is a federal warrant," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "It was signed exactly 7 days ago by a federal judge. My company, Aegis Security, did not initiate this investigation. The Securities and Exchange Commission flagged Apollo Vanguard 3 months ago for massive irregularities in their liquidity pools. The SEC then contracted my firm as an independent third-party auditor to analyze the data." I pointed to the judge's signature at the bottom of the page. This warrant granted my team full, unrestricted administrative access to every single server email account and digital wallet Jamal operated. We did not have to bypass any firewalls or break any encryption. The federal government gave us the master keys. Brittany shook her head stubbornly. No, Jamal is too smart for that. He uses decentralized blockchain networks. He told me the government could not touch his money. He lied to you, Brittany, I said bluntly. He used buzzwords to make you feel secure while he funneled investor funds straight into his personal checking account. It was not a sophisticated crypto operation, it was a textbook Ponzi scheme. He used the money from new investors like Mom and Dad to pay off the early investors who were threatening to sue him. When the new investments dried up, the entire scheme collapsed. My father sank into one of the dining chairs, rubbing his temples violently. You knew this a week ago, Richard asked, his voice cracking. You knew he was stealing our money and you did not warn us. You gave him the money 6 months ago, Dad, I corrected him. And you took out the second mortgage 3 weeks ago. By the time my firm was contracted to audit the accounts, the money was already gone. I did not come here tonight to ruin Jamal. The FBI was coming for him regardless of what I did. I came here to stop you from signing away Grandma's apartment. I came here to give you a chance to walk away from him before the federal agents kicked your door down. But instead of listening, you handed me an eviction notice. The truth hung heavily in the air. There was no conspiracy against them. There was no jealous sister sabotaging their happiness. There was only their own blinding greed and the devastating consequences of their terrible judgment. The truth hung heavily in the air. There was no conspiracy against them. There was no jealous sister sabotaging their happiness. There was only their own blinding greed and the devastating consequences of their terrible judgment. Before anyone could say another word, the heavy oak front door swung open once again, letting in a chilling night breeze. The lead FBI agent stepped back into the foyer, holding Jamal firmly by the arm. Jamal's wrists were now securely handcuffed behind his back. His tailored suit was severely rumpled, and the arrogant crypto entrepreneur looked entirely broken. The agent pushed him forward slightly, forcing him to stand under the bright light of the foyer chandelier. I need his passport, the lead agent announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. He claims it is in his briefcase. We also have authorization to seize any digital storage devices or hidden hardware wallets on his person. Jamal kept his head down, completely unable to meet the eyes of the family he had just destroyed. My father stared at the handcuffs, the cold steel reflecting the light. It was the undeniable physical proof of everything I had just explained, the brutal reality they could no longer deny. Brittany stared at her husband's bound hands, her breath hitching in her throat. Jamal, she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. Tell them to take those off. Tell them this is a mistake. It is not a mistake, ma'am, the agent stated firmly. Your husband is being formally charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud and international money laundering. Because you are legally married to him, every asset purchased during your marriage is now classified as the proceeds of a crime. Brittany blinked rapidly, the legal terminology hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. What does that mean? She asked, panic rising sharply in her voice. It means everything is gone, the agent replied, without an ounce of sympathy. The luxury penthouse lease is terminated. The vehicles will be impounded by the state tomorrow morning. The designer handbags, the diamond jewelry you are currently wearing, and the joint bank accounts you use are all frozen and subject to strict federal forfeiture. You do not own anything anymore. The reality of her situation finally shattered the last remaining wall of Brittany's delusion. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was the wife of a federal criminal, and she was entirely destitute. Brittany let out a blood-curdling scream. It was a visceral, high-pitched shriek of absolute horror that pierced my eardrums. She grabbed the sides of her head, pacing frantically around the hardwood floor of the foyer like a trapped animal. No, Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. You cannot take my things. I did not do anything wrong. I did not know he was stealing from my parents. You cannot take my car. You cannot take my jewelry. I am the victim here. I deserve to keep what belongs to me. She lunged toward Jamal, her manicured hands curling into aggressive claws. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, striking him hard in the chest. Jamal flinched, unable to defend himself with his hands restrained. "You promised me a perfect life. You promised me millions of dollars. You are a liar and a thief. I hate you." "Brittany, please." Jamal begged, hot tears streaming down his face. "I did it for us. You have to call my lawyer. You have to help me fix this." "Help you?" Brittany laughed hysterically, the sound completely devoid of sanity. "I do not even have money for a taxi. How am I supposed to help you? I am filing for divorce the second you are out of my sight." The FBI agent stepped between them, easily pushing Brittany back. "That is enough," the agent commanded. "Step away from the suspect immediately." David walked calmly over to the dining table, picked up Jamal's leather briefcase and handed it directly to the federal agent. "The passport is in the front pocket," David informed him, keeping his professional demeanor. The agent nodded, gripping Jamal by the arm once more. "Let us go, Henderson," the agent said. "Your luxury lifestyle is officially over." Jamal looked back over his shoulder one last time. He did not look at his screaming wife or his devastated mother-in-law. He looked directly at me. His eyes were filled with raw hatred and absolute defeat. He opened his mouth to say something, but the agent shoved him forward, marching him out the door into the flashing lights of the federal vehicles waiting outside. Brittany collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her screams of horror echoed through the house, a miserable soundtrack to the absolute destruction of the golden child. My mother fell to her knees beside her, wrapping her arms around her favorite daughter, rocking back and forth as if mourning a sudden death. My father remained standing, completely paralyzed. He looked at his weeping wife and daughter, and then he looked at me. The man who had spent his entire life valuing wealth above his own children had just lost everything he cared about in a single night. His golden empire was nothing more than dust and ashes. The shock on my father's face slowly morphed into a desperate need for control. His son-in-law was gone. His wife was sobbing on the floor. His retirement fund vanished. But his narcissistic mind could not accept total defeat. He needed a lifeline, something to prove he was still the patriarch, still the man in charge. Smoothing his shirt with shaking hands, he straightened his posture. He walked deliberately back to the dining room and gripped the head chair. "We will recover from this," Richard announced. His voice was unsteady, growing louder to convince himself. "Jamal is a criminal, fine. He fooled us all. But we are not completely ruined. I still have assets. I still have leverage." David and I followed him. "What assets are you talking about, Dad? Your bank accounts are tied to a massive tax penalty from Mom cashing out her retirement fund early." My father let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He pointed a finger at me, his eyes gleaming with a sudden toxic triumph. "The apartment, Natalie. Grandma's apartment. You think you won tonight because Jamal got arrested, but you forgot one crucial detail. My name is still on that master deed. I am still the legal executor of that property." He puffed out his chest, stepping toward me with renewed arrogance. "I took out a $300,000 second mortgage on it, yes. But the property itself is highly desirable and worth at least $800,000 in today's inflated market. Tomorrow morning I am calling a real estate agent. I am putting that apartment on the market for a cash sale. I will use the proceeds to pay off the bank loan, and I will keep the remaining $500,000 to rebuild my retirement." He smiled, a cruel, gloating expression. "You are still being evicted, Natalie. You can parade around with your fancy lawyers and corporate titles all you want, but you are still sleeping under a roof that I own. I am going to sell it right out from under you. You might be a millionaire, but you have zero control over that property. I still hold the winning hand." I looked at my father, genuinely amazed that his fragile ego could survive such a catastrophic evening. He was standing in the wreckage of his life, still trying to find a way to make me the loser. I turned to look at David. David simply shook his head, looking at my father with professional detachment. He opened his briefcase one final time, You really do not understand how corporate finance works, do you? Dad? I asked, my voice calm. When you took out that second mortgage 3 weeks ago, you made a massive tactical error. You used the property as collateral for a high-risk commercial bridge loan, not a standard residential mortgage. My father frowned, his gloating smile faltering slightly. So what? A loan is a loan. The bank holds the lien until I sell the place. Exactly, I agreed smoothly. The bank holds the lien. But banks do not like risk. When the Federal Reserve initiated their secret investigation into Jamal's firm last week, they flagged every single account tied to Apollo Vanguard. That included the $300,000 you wired directly from your bank to his. David pulled a legally binding contract from his briefcase and placed it squarely on the dining table. When a bank realizes a mortgage was used to fund an active Ponzi scheme, they classify that mortgage as toxic debt, I explained, stepping closer. They immediately seek to offload that bad debt to private equity firms to clear it from their books. Yesterday morning, the bank that holds your mortgage put your toxic debt up for private auction. My father stared at the document on the table, the color rapidly draining from his face once again. What are you saying? I am saying the bank sold your debt, Dad. I held the contract out to him. And guess who bought it? Aegis Holdings has a private equity division. We specialize in acquiring distressed assets. I bought your mortgage for pennies on the dollar. Richard stumbled backward as if I had physically struck him. No, he gasped. That is not possible. You cannot do that. It is perfectly legal, David interjected smoothly. The transfer of the lien was finalized at noon today. I dropped the contract onto the floor at his feet. You do not own that apartment anymore, Dad. I own the debt. I hold the lien. And because the funds were used in a federal crime, the loan is in immediate default. I am your sole legal creditor. You have 48 hours to pay me the full $300,000, or I will foreclose on this house. I dropped the contract onto the floor at his feet. You do not own that apartment anymore, Dad. I own the debt. I hold the lien. And because the funds were used in a federal crime, the loan is in immediate default. I am your sole legal creditor. You have 48 hours to pay me the full $300,000, or I will foreclose on this house. The absolute silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in that house. It was not just a pause in the conversation. It was the crushing, suffocating sound of a lifelong illusion being violently ripped out by the roots. My father stared at the thick white paper resting on the hardwood floor right next to the torn pieces of the eviction notice he had thrown at me earlier. He did not bend down to pick it up. He did not move a single muscle. His face, which had been bright red with arrogant fury just moments ago, drained of all color until it matched the pale parchment at his feet. His jaw worked silently, opening and closing, as his brain desperately tried to formulate a counterattack, a loophole, a threat, anything to regain the upper hand. But there was nothing left. His narcissistic armor had been completely shattered by the cold, unforgiving reality of corporate finance. He was trapped. In the foyer, my mother had stopped comforting Brittany. The words "foreclose on this house" had cut through her hysterical sobbing like a razor blade. Susan slowly pulled herself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the doorframe for support. Her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled. Her makeup was running down her face in dark streaks, and she looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "Richard," my mother whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely articulate the syllables. "Richard, look at me. Tell me she is lying. Tell me we are not losing our home." My father could not look at her. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, his broad shoulders slumping forward in total defeat. The man who had spent 34 years treating me like a worthless freeloader, the man who had prioritized his son-in-law over his own flesh and blood, was suddenly stripped of every ounce of his authority. Richard Susan screamed, the sheer terror in her voice, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Did you cross-collateralize our primary residence? Did you risk the house we live in to get that loan for Jamal?" He swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. I thought it was a sure thing, my father rasped, his voice sounding incredibly small and hollow. Jamal said the return would cover the mortgage in a month. I was trying to secure our future, Susan. I was trying to build generational wealth. Generational wealth. My mother repeated, her eyes widening in absolute horror. She stepped into the dining room, looking around at the crystal chandelier, the expensive floral wallpaper, the fine china scattered across the table. Her eyes darted wildly as her mind finally did the catastrophic math. My retirement account is completely gone, Susan muttered, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The $400,000 I saved my entire life is gone. Jamal is going to federal prison. Brittany is completely broke and her assets are frozen by the government. And now the bank does not own our house. Natalie owns our house, and we owe her $300,000 by Friday. She looked at me, taking in my calm, unbothered expression, and then looked back at my father, who was staring blankly into the abyss of his own ruin. They had spent their entire lives treating people like disposable assets, prioritizing appearance over substance. They had driven me away, belittled my career, and placed all their faith in a charismatic criminal. Now the bill for their arrogance had come due, and the price was everything they possessed. We are going to be the laughingstock of the neighborhood, Susan babbled, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. The country club will find out. Our friends will know we were conned. We have nothing left. We are completely penniless. We are going to be homeless. Mom, Brittany cried out from the hallway, struggling to stand up and reach her. Susan's eyes rolled to the back of her head. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed like a marionette, with its strings suddenly cut, hitting the dining room floor with a dull, heavy thud. My father gasped, dropping to his knees beside her. "Susan!" he yelled, shaking her shoulders. "Susan, wake up!" Brittany rushed in, screaming hysterically, and falling to the floor next to her unconscious mother. The chaotic, manicured facade of their perfect suburban family was entirely destroyed, replaced by a devastating scene of absolute misery. David immediately stepped forward, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I am calling emergency services for a paramedic," David stated with absolute professional detachment. He did not offer comfort. He simply executed the necessary medical protocol. I looked down at my father. He was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the shattered glass of the wine cup, the ripped eviction notice, and the legal contract that stripped him of his home. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears of absolute despair. He opened his mouth to beg to use the family card he had weaponized for decades, but no words came out. He was completely speechless, entirely broken, and left to choke on the bitter ashes of his own greed. I did not feel sorry for him. I felt free. I did not feel sorry for him. I felt free. Walking out of that house and stepping into the quiet comfort of my chauffeured car, I left behind 3 decades of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. The air had never tasted so clean. Exactly 3 weeks passed since the federal raid that shattered my family's delusions. The fallout was swift and merciless, just as the FBI agent had promised. The government froze every single asset tied to Jamal's name. That included Brittany's leased penthouse, her luxury vehicles, her designer wardrobe, and the joint bank accounts she had happily drained to fund her shopping addictions. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on me was suddenly stripped of her shiny armor. Last Tuesday, I received a frantic voicemail from an unknown number. It was Brittany. She was crying hysterically, calling from a prepaid cell phone. She told me she was living in a cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, eating gas station food because her credit cards were all declined. She begged me to send her $10,000 to hire a divorce lawyer and secure a new apartment. She promised she had changed and that we were still sisters. I did not call her back. I simply blocked the number and forwarded the voicemail to David for my legal records. She chose to build her life on stolen money, and now she had to learn how to survive in the real world. I was sitting at my desk on the top floor of the Aegis Security headquarters, reviewing a new contract with the Department of Defense. My office featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the downtown skyline. It was a stark contrast to the small, dusty apartment my family had tried to kick me out of. The heavy oak doors of my office opened and David walked in. He looked impeccable as always, carrying a familiar silver tablet. "We have an uninvited guest in the main lobby," David said, his tone entirely neutral. Building security stopped him at the front desk. "He is demanding to speak with you. He says it is a family emergency." I did not need to ask who it was. The timeline fit perfectly. The 48-hour deadline I had given them to pay off the $300,000 mortgage had come and gone weeks ago. We had officially initiated the foreclosure process on their suburban house. "Send him up," I said, setting my pen down. "Let us get this over with." 10 minutes later, the glass doors of my office slid open. My father walked in, but he was barely recognizable. The booming, arrogant patriarch who had threatened to throw me out onto the street was completely gone. His suit hung loosely on his frame, deeply wrinkled as if he had slept in it. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot and surrounded by dark, heavy bags. He stopped a few feet from my desk, looking around the massive, luxurious office with an expression of pure, unfiltered awe. He finally realized the sheer magnitude of the empire I had built, while he was busy calling me a failure. Natalie Richard whispered, his voice cracking instantly. He took a step forward, his hands trembling at his sides. "Please, you have to help us." I stared at him, my expression perfectly blank. "Help you with what, Dad? I am incredibly busy today." He swallowed hard, the last shreds of his pride dissolving under the cold fluorescent lights of my corporate headquarters. "The bank called yesterday," he stammered. "They said the foreclosure is moving forward. They are giving us 30 days to vacate the property." "Susan is having a nervous breakdown. She cannot get out of bed. We have no savings left. The tax penalties from her retirement withdrawal wiped out our checking accounts. We cannot even afford to rent an apartment. We are going to be homeless, Natalie. You have to stop the foreclosure." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. "You took out a toxic loan to fund a criminal enterprise," I reminded him calmly. "I bought that loan. You defaulted. The foreclosure is simply a standard business procedure. You cannot do this to your own parents," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. He dropped to his knees right there on the pristine carpet of my office. He actually got on his knees. "We are family, Natalie. I am your father. I know I made mistakes. I know I was blind to Jamal. But you have hundreds of millions of dollars. 300,000 is nothing to you. You could wipe out this debt with the stroke of a pen and save our lives. Please, I am begging you to forgive me. Please give us a second chance. Please give us a second chance." I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor of my office. For a brief second, a memory flashed through my mind. I remembered being a teenager standing in the living room holding my straight-A report card, hoping for just a fraction of the praise he effortlessly showered on Brittany. I remembered the cold indifference in his eyes back then. Now those same eyes were wide with terror and desperation, begging for mercy. "Get up, Dad," I said, my voice completely flat. "Do not embarrass yourself any further." Richard slowly got to his feet. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, looking at me with a pathetic glimmer of hope. "You will help us?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I am going to offer you a transaction," I replied. "Because that is what this family has always been to you. A series of financial transactions. You only valued people based on what they could do for your image. So we are going to handle this exactly like a business deal." David placed a stack of legal documents on my desk and handed my father a heavy silver pen. "I am not going to wipe out your debt," I explained calmly. "However, I am willing to buy Grandma's apartment from you." David had an independent appraiser value the property yesterday. The fair market value is exactly $850,000. My father let out a massive sigh of relief. "Thank God. Thank you, Natalie. With that money we can pay off the bank and Susan and I will have $500,000 left." We can buy a small condo. We can start over. I held up my hand, stopping his celebration. You are not getting $500,000, Dad. Let us do the math. The purchase price is $850,000. We are subtracting the $300,000 toxic loan you owe me. We are subtracting the $40,000 tax penalty from Mom cashing out her retirement early. We are also subtracting the legal fees, closing costs, and the 6 months of back taxes you conveniently forgot to pay on the property while funding Jamal. David tapped his tablet. After all deductions, David stated clearly, the final payout to you and your wife will be exactly $62,400. Richard froze. $62,000? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Natalie, that is absolutely nothing. That will barely cover a year of rent and basic living expenses. How are we supposed to survive? You will have to get jobs, I replied smoothly. Like normal people. You can downsize. You can learn to live within your actual means instead of funding a ridiculous fantasy. $62,000 is more than you deserve, and it is the only offer you will get today. But there is a catch. I tapped the final page of the contract. If you sign this buyout agreement and take the check, you are also signing a legally binding severance clause. This document acts as a permanent cease and desist order. It legally severs all ties between us. You, Mom, and Brittany are never allowed to contact me again. No phone calls, no emails, no showing up at my office. If you violate this agreement, I will freeze the payout and drag you through civil court until you are entirely bankrupt. My father stared at me. You are cutting us off forever. You cut me off a long time ago, Dad, I said. I am just making it legally binding. Sign the paper, take the money, and never speak to me again. Richard looked at the pen in his hand. He knew he had absolutely no leverage left. With a shaking hand, he leaned over my desk and signed his name on the dotted line, officially selling his control, his pride, and his family entirely. David handed him a certified cashier's check. The transaction is complete, David said. Security will escort you out. Richard did not say another word. He took the check, turned around, and walked out of my office, a completely broken man. I walked over to the windows and watched the street below. A few minutes later, I saw my father emerge from the building, clutching the small check as he disappeared into the sea of ordinary people. I grabbed my purse, took the private elevator to the executive garage, and stepped into the back of my waiting BMW. As my driver pulled out onto the avenue, leaving the past behind in the dust, I felt a profound sense of peace. The narcissistic chains were finally broken. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries. Thank you for watching. And remember, your worth is never determined by people who refuse to see your true value. The most profound lesson to take away from this story is that true self-worth can never be determined by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. For decades, her family treated her like a failure because she did not fit into their superficial mold of success. They valued flashy cars and leased penthouses over genuine character and hard work. But she did not let their toxic projections become her reality. Instead of fighting for a seat at a table where she was constantly disrespected, she quietly built her own empire. This story teaches us that family loyalty should never be a blank check for financial or emotional abuse. Narcissistic people will often use guilt and obligation to keep you trapped in a cycle of manipulation. They will demand that you sacrifice your own security to fund their delusions, just as her parents demanded she surrender her home to save a criminal. The hardest but most necessary step in healing is realizing that you do not owe your life to people who only love you conditionally. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Walking away and severing ties is never about petty revenge. It is about protecting your peace and refusing to be collateral damage in someone else's self-inflicted ruin. Sometimes the only way to win a toxic game is to completely stop playing. You have to be willing to let them misunderstand you, let them be angry, and let them face the consequences of their own actions while you step into your own freedom. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your own peace, please share your experience in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about claiming your independence.